Hey Casey, it's Julie. I feel a little silly doing a video on this, but we didn't get an opportunity to do it over Christmas, so I just wanted to give you an idea of how to do Dad's noodles. It's really difficult to describe because nothing is measured. Everything's done by sight, and truly, I probably haven't seen him make them in about 7 years. So if you ask him, he's probably going to do it a little bit differently than I do it, but I'll give you the best tutorial I can, and I assure you you're going to do your own twist on it. I'm going to start with a couple things that you're going to need. You will need the most important ones: a gigantic cutting board. And no matter what you do, you're going to get flour everywhere. This is technically never big enough, but I don't think I would have a hard time growing out of a cutting board regardless of what size I use. So try to get something about this big, and I wouldn't recommend anybody try it without rocking an apron. Of course, you're going to need a noodle cutter, what my family refers to as a noodle cutter. This is mine. It has little metal blades in it. It's technically an herb mincer, but mine has this funky little shield that I have to remove every time that I have to wash it. So yours is going to be a little bit better for that. But anyway, herb mincer, also known as a noodle cutter. Gigantic mixing bowl. You're going to need a mixer if you have one. You can do it by hand, but this is why my dad gripes about it being so labor intensive, and I don't think it's as difficult once he discovered you can use dough hooks. So I got a mixer that I probably technically bought for this, and it had dough hooks, and it comes in a nice case, and it has a little bit of power to it. But let me think, what else? I'm gonna have to remove you. Oop. Oh, I can't see what I'm doing. Anyway, this is how much turkey broth I have. Ooh, that's hot. That's how much turkey broth I have. Just to give me an idea, I'll throw my hand in front of it so you know how big that pot is. That's a pretty good size of pot. I had a 20-pound bird. I boiled it down once in a gigantic pot. I boiled it down a second time. And the second time is always weaker, so you want to go with your first broth. And from there, maybe add the second kind. The watered down version. Alright. Oh, I'm so not good with these tripods. Sorry about this. Sorry about that. Anyway, I think those are most of your utensils that you're going to use there. Hold on, I can't see what I'm doing. Okay. Those are most of the utensils you're going to use, and if I think of another one... Oh, one of the things I do want to point out. I have this like little slippy, no slip thing that I'll put under my cutting board because... Oh! Duh, you need a rolling pin. You can't live without a rolling pin. But when you're working that dough, when you're rolling it out, my cutting board is going to be slipping all over the place. So I grabbed one of these out of my cabinet one day and I've never put it back. Anyway, so what I have, and I wish I'd shown this to you before I seasoned it, but I kind of thought of the video after the fact. I have a bunch of flour in this bowl. I don't measure it out, I just pour it out. Big, huge. I don't measure it out, I just pour it out and then I season it. I was going to set some of it aside because you add eggs and then like if it's really sticky you add more of the flour. I have 7 medium eggs in here in a separate bowl. I'm not going to be able to tip that so you can see it, I'm sure. But anyway, I just beat up some eggs. Have 7 of those suckers, and if I had to guess about how much seasoning I put in that, maybe like a 1/4 cup. And what we typically use is we'll use that Knorr Aromat was what we originally used, and we'll use that to season our broth. If your broth is a little bit weak, you can use chicken bouillon. Oh, that better than bouillon would probably be really good that you use. You can use, I use seasoning salt. I've done lemon pepper versions of this. I haven't done that in a while because I kind of had a bad experience, but you can get a little bit creative, but typically we'll do salt, pepper, garlic powder. I don't know that my dad does that. I do garlic and onion powder. And I started also using the Greek seasoning that you guys introduced me to in lieu of the Aromat. But anyway, so season up your broth. Make sure you don't get too crazy with one or the other. I usually try to let one be a little bit stronger so it has more flavor. And then of course the noodles are going to absorb the broth. So I've already seasoned this. I was going to set a portion of it aside. So I don't end up with too many noodles for my broth. Again, that's an eyeballing thing. I'll try to give you a little video of it as I go to put them in the pot. But probably about half, I guess. If you had your broth and then you put your noodles in when they're raw, half the volume maybe is really safe. I'll probably go a little higher than that, maybe 2/3 or something. It's just an eyeball thing. It's so everything is. So it's hard to describe, but I don't want to end up with so many noodles that I don't have enough broth and then you have to water it down. That's really boo. You'd rather make more noodles. And you will also need several mixing bowls. I don't technically need this one. I usually just crack the eggs right into the flour and then just mix it up. But I wanted to give you an idea of, you know, all the separate ingredients that you're going to do. You need a second large mixing bowl, well, medium, smaller than this. But you'll need a second mixing bowl so you can put your noodles, once you've separated them, you can put those into that mixing bowl before you put them in the pot because you want to put them all in the pot at the exact same time. Anyway, so I've got my flour. I've taken some of that out. I'm going to add my eggs, but first I'm going to get my mixer up and rolling. Okay, so season flour, add your eggs, and then you're going to start mixing it with the dough hooks. This saves your arm quite a bit. I'm just going to give you an idea what this looks like. My counter ends up destroyed by the time this is done. I'm going to have flour over every inch of the kitchen. See how it's really sticky in the middle and then you get this like flour around the edges? That's okay. Like when it's all said and done and mixed for me. I still have some flour in the bottom, but this is entirely too wet, so we are going to need to add some more flour mixture. But that little bit of flour that's left over in the bottom will keep it sticking to the bottom, and you can roll it in that as you're kneading. to dry it out and get it to more of a dough consistency. I don't know if you could see this. Anyway, it's starting to stiffen up a little bit. And it's starting to move through and roll. If you've ever used dough hooks before, you'd probably be familiar. Alright. Now on the outside, when it's rolling around in there, I don't know if you can see that, but it has a little bit of flour rolling around the outer edge. I might, with this much and that much, or this much dough and that much of the broth, I might actually have to make some more flour. We'll see where we go. But you can keep, like, if it's not working out and you end up with it's too dry and now it's getting to be too wet, that's why you have the flour over here. You can add eggs, you can add flour. I might not altogether have enough flour out. It's hard for me to say. Let me grab the eggs, hold on. Okay. I'm going to add a couple more eggs because I definitely want more of this action, but and one of the downsides to, of course, cracking right in your bowl, I hope I don't jinx myself, because you could potentially lose an eggshell in there, so that's one of the benefits. It's not necessary, but that's one of the benefits, of course, too. To cracking them in a separate bowl. Although Maple loves to tell me that I'm the queen of creating dishes when I'm cooking, and he's right. Now, if I feel like I've seasoned my flour good enough, and I'm getting to the point where I feel like I need more flour aside from what I've set aside, it's not a big deal to add just plain flour. How wet that is? I hope so. It's really sticky. I can't take that with me. It's still really sticky. Okay? So we definitely need to add a little more flour. Now you want to be careful how much you add, otherwise you're going to be playing that catch-up game 1,000 times over. Oh, I got that wet. Here's why I create like a million dishes right here. I just have a ladle. I'm just going to, you know, sprinkle a little in there. Get this a little closer to being dough. getting warm. And the way you know you're getting warm, I was trying to say earlier, can you see that flour around the exterior there? I mean, we're going to roll this. Oh, that's still sticky though. We're going to roll this in the flour in the bottom of the bowl eventually. But we're getting a little bit warm because some of it is more of a dough consistency. And you bake, unlike me. So you kind of have an idea there. But don't get it, I'm sure it's probably not quite like bread. Maybe it is, I have no idea. Rolls or something, maybe it would be like that. And at some point we start, I think we're actually there. Yeah, we're there. Let me see if I can. All right. I'm just rolling it in the flour, of course, kneading it, essentially. And it's close enough that I think I'm good. You're gonna keep your flour out, of course, because you're gonna add it to your cutting board, your rolling pin, and possibly even more into here. But I'll need to get another bowl now. I'm gonna take some of the dough off these hooks, since it seems like it might be a little bit small of a batch. Your hands are going to be covered in glue. It's disgusting. So from here, I'm going to get a little bit of goop off the counter here so I can get that on the back side of my cutting board, because I roll like that. And my sticky thing, my gigantic cutting board. And you want to clear yourself some space because it's going to get kind of hairy. Noodle cutter. Okay. Can you see what I'm doing? I think you can. So I'm just putting a little bit of flour on the cutting board. And then sometimes you set yourself up with a little pile towards the edge so you have a little bit you can grab from. And what I'll usually do, you gotta spread it all over the board. And I end up using, like I said before, I end up using every inch of this board. So as much as you tell yourself you can be a little more organized, if you're me, you certainly cannot. And you're just going to end up throwing flour everywhere. I'm going to put a little bit more of this flour into this bowl because when you go to break off a piece to work with, it's going to, you know, it's going to have the sticky inside because I don't knead real thoroughly. And I mean, I guess that's it. I'm not a real formal kneader, I'm sure. But the better you knead it, the less you have to do that. And I'm just going to knead it until it's no longer tacky on my hands. But of course, the more flour you add, the harder it is to roll out. I'm still sticky. Okay, so I have a little ball of dough. It's maybe a little small. It's been a minute since I've made these, so we'll see how I go with that. All right, take flour, rub that all over your rolling pin. I'm sure if I allow comments on this video, I will get all kinds of obscene remarks about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this out and just keep adding flour to make sure you don't stick to your rolling pin. Ooh, that might have gotten a little sticky now. Keep spreading your flour out underneath so it doesn't stick to the other side. This is how I get flour everywhere. I don't know if you can see every move, but I'm being real smooth. And shoot, I'm terrible with measurements. I don't know. 1/4 inch, could be 1/8 of an inch, could be 1/5 of an inch. You see the way that moves? It's going to keep, I hope you can see how thin that was. It's fairly thin. Oh man, I just made a hole in it. Anyway, it's fairly thin, and the longer it sits on its own on this board, it's going to kind of crunch back up, and just, keep that in mind. Okay, now, I was brilliant and I didn't pull down my medium-sized bowl to put the noodles in, so I've got to wash my hands and grab that real quick. By the way, Brian Casey, I can't thank you enough for my new mixing bowls. I heart them. Okay. Alright. My dad will usually cut it into a more manageable piece. I cut as many corners as I possibly can. Alright. Now, I hope you can see this. Alright. So what you do is you cut and then you peel them. Can you see that? And they're going to end up like dumplings. For anybody who doesn't know my dad's noodles, they end up like stringy dumplings. They're like, spätzle. That's what it's called. So you just cut those puppies down and you roll out the entire thing and do this. Now again, notes on broth. It'll take multiple chickens. If you want to do this with chicken broth, which you can, I use turkey broth. Our family opinion is that it's the best broth to use. I really don't think anybody would argue me on that one, but if you prefer to use chicken, maybe 2, maybe even 3. It depends on like how big of a batch you're doing. And of course, I can't tell you how many this will feed. It'll probably feed 5 people for a night, but I mean, I don't know. I eat them for days, so. And I don't share. I don't like to share food. And the longer you let these sit in the bowl like this, they will start to stick together and clump together. And when you first put them in the broth, they're going to want to be like one gigantic clump. And my favorite thing to use, and I think my dad uses it, I know he serves it with a ladle, but my favorite thing to use to dish these puppies up is one of these. It grabs the noodles, and then I dish it out separately, the broth, of course, with the ladle, because I like to create as many dishes as humanly possible. But I will use that. Once I'm putting them in the broth, I will use that to stir and break up the noodles, because they will want to clump together. So you kind of, like when you first put them in there, you just have to like mix and mix and mix and make sure that they're not bunching up together. And if while they're cooking, like, okay, you have your seasoned broth, you don't want to water it down. If it is a little watered down because you did, like I did, you did 2 boils. By the way, this is going to tell you how good your noodles are. I've never died from it. I've been stealing noodle dough since I was a little kid, so anyway. If you boil it down twice like I did, you got to watch that second one. That second one can get pretty gross if you don't watch it, and you want to make sure it's thick. Like when I make my broth, I boil it for hours. And when it is in the fridge, cooling off, before I stick it in the freezer, I usually freeze it until I'm ready to use it, it should gel. And I wish I could have shown you that. But it should gel up, and you should be able to scoop it with a spoon. That's like great broth that you will probably add water to. But the watered down stuff, not so much. It's going to be a little bit more cloudy. With any luck, it will have some bit of gelling, and there will be fat on the top a lot of times. And if there's fat on the top, you might want to scrape off some of it. I'll probably scrape off like at least 2/3 of it. Sometimes more. If it's really thick, I'm not going to leave it on there. If it's a thin layer, I might leave on like 1/3. Anyway. So, don't forget to flour your rolling pin as you go into this again. Oop, that was gross. Rocky, come here. This is why I have dogs. I dropped a piece of dough off my hand if you didn't see that. Okay. Try to avoid folds when you're rolling. But it doesn't matter. I mean, they don't have to be a consistent length or anything. We're very whimsical about our noodles, I suppose. Or I am, at least. Dad never sees me make them, so you can't tell me I'm doing it wrong. But I do know his are still my favorite, and when I do have them, they taste pretty different from mine. I don't know what he's doing by way of seasoning. He used to just season the broth, and then I think Emerald told him that, you know, he doesn't, I don't know what he said exactly. It was kind of a cute story, but I'm not going to do it any justice. Something about he doesn't like his flour plain, so he seasons it, something to that effect. And what's really great is if you incorporate somebody into this. Well, while you're rolling it out and cutting it, they can be dividing the noodles so they're not busy sticking together in the bowl and going in as a gigantic clump. Of course, Maple isn't here right now, so I can't recruit him. And he can't laugh at me for making the video. But be sure to pull them all apart when you're pressing down with your noodle cutter. Be sure to press down pretty hard. When my dad did it by hand, when he did it, it always was so much stiffer than mine. I don't know why. Maybe he's a better kneader, but mine's, like when I'm pulling them apart, they're still sticky in the center. But they end up all fat and plump like his do, so I don't think I've got like lots less flour. I don't know why. But his seem a little thicker than mine when he's rolling them out and you're separating his noodles. I'm trying not to let them go in there stuck together still, but wow. Okay. So I have been sort of boiling or, well, simmering my broth, just so you know. And that way it's nice and hot when I'm ready to pour these suckers in. And I still have like 3 more batches of noodles to do, but I think I'm going to cut off the camera so you don't sit here and listen to me gab on for a while. But I do want to show you. This is what the noodles look like in the bowl. I'm eventually just going to dunk them straight into that broth. If it gets to the point where your noodles have plumped up so much that you are now running low on broth, like we talked about, you don't want to be short on broth, we will add a cup of hot water, preferably like maybe with a bouillon cube or something. Don't let it get to the point where they've just absorbed everything there is to absorb. Try to add that water prior to that catastrophic disaster. But I think I'll probably turn you on again just so you can see when I'm dumping them in and a little bit as they're cooking. But I have a bunch more noodles to do, so I'm going to turn you off. Okay, it is recording. I'm sorry. Okay, so I have all the noodles chopped up. See about how many I have? My hand, it's kind of a big hand, but just for reference, so you know about how many I have. I think we're going to be a little low, and I might make some more. I'll let you know if I do. Anyway, so I wanted to, oops, sorry about that. I wanted to show you what it looks like when we go to throw them in the broth. Alright, so those are the noodles. I'm going to grab my magical noodle stirrer. And sorry about that. I should have a professional crew, but that's not going to happen. Alright, so we have our broth, and I have not seasoned this broth very much, just FYI. I want you to see how this goes in. Oh God, I'm going to burn myself. Oh. I told you! That is a two-handed project. Anyway, so they're in there, but you see how they clump together? You gotta be sure to spread those suckers apart, and I'm gonna have to switch burners because now I'm gonna burn all this stuff all over. Anyway, so you're gonna mix them up, and they're already plumping. I don't know if you can see that, but they're already plumping just a tiny bit, and they're going to be like stiffer, and you would almost think that you were overcooking them, but it's not until they get soft. And of course, Casey, you've had them. Anybody who's had spatzel, it's supposed to be more of that consistency. But it's going to be really stiff for a while, which is funny because they're so soft when they're all wiggly and dough. And that's all going to change. But I'll try to time it so we know how long we've put them in for. Anyway, let me put the lid back on. Alright, see that? I have helpers. They're in here scrounging. But anyway, okay, I'll let you know as we get that back to like I wouldn't want to call it a rolling boil, more of a simmer. Keep the lid on there. Now that I look at it, I'm almost thinking maybe I'll have to add some water. Again, everything, I've never measured anything, so I have no idea when. It's just one of those things, it's like instinctual. But to me right now, with all of those sitting there floating on the top, it looks like it might be a little bit light on broth, which is fine because I boiled it, or, well, simmered it or whatever forever. But yeah, I'll probably add a cup of water, like a half a cup of water. Not by half a cup measuring cup, probably a cup and a half of water or a cup of water or something like that if you're going to use a measuring cup. I was talking about half a glass. Anyway, I'm going to add some water to that. It was a pretty beefy broth mixture. Of course, I probably lost half of it when I did that. Anyway, see you guys in a bit. Okay, I just want to show you what the danger zone looks like, okay? I checked the noodles and they've been cooking for 40 minutes and we're getting to the point where they might be cooked. I haven't tasted them. I want you to know what it looks like when you're thinking about putting in water, depending on how like stiff they are. You know about how hard a pasta noodle, I guess, should be. Just want to make sure it's probably a little bit firmer than that, but it's not like a dumpling. Now I live in the South, of course, and I haven't met a dumpling I like, but I think that they're usually a little stiffer, and this should be a little stiffer than pasta. Anyway, you see those suckers? You see how thick it is? It's getting to this point. We don't have a whole lot of broth. I have the flame on kind of high. And by the way, I wanted to mention, I did let it sit long enough, and I've never had such a big clump. I had to break that up, and I just took it, I basically like find the clump and like stick the teeth in it and kind of like rub it against the bottom, and I was able to break most of it up. I might have a couple lumps, but again, it's going to be like dumplings if that's the case. I'm going to turn this down. Most of the time I left the lid on to keep the moisture in, but then I started to think I had too much juice, and it's a game of, is it too much juice? Is it too much noodles? Is it too much egg? Is it too much flour? It's really a difficult thing to assess. So, like many things in my life, I just wing it through the entire process. Okay, see that flippity floppity noodle? I'll tell you how that goes. Actually, that's just about right. So, word to the wise. That was like between 40 and 50 minutes. And they were done. I only uncovered it for maybe like the last 10 minutes or so. And they're basically done. But if you're looking like that, and that's all the juice you have, and they're still really stiff, then you need to be thinking about adding water. Add hot water. And, maybe a bouillon cube. I added, just so you know, it was about 2 cups of water, I guess. And I was right. One of my glasses was about 1 cup. So, or half a glass was about 1 cup. So I added about 2 cups of water to this one. Beyond what you saw before. But it's really hard for you to get like a perspective thing. My hand looks kind of big next to this. But that's a big pot. That's a pretty good pot. I'm not going to touch it, of course. Anyway. That's how you make my dad's noodles. I wanted to add a couple tips. I think I wrote them down. Yep. Okay. Cleaning the cutting board. One of the things that you want to think about when you're cleaning the cutting board is you dust off the flour. Flour and water equal glue. Dust off the flour first, and then wash it. Secondly, cleaning the bowl that you mixed the dough in. When you're cleaning the bowl, you should really, Sorry about that. You should really think about scraping out the contents of it first. I'm sorry, I gotta let Bear in. Hold on. Think about scraping the contents out before you actually wash it. And I wouldn't put, when you're dusting off the flour on the cutting board, I put it straight in the trash can because I don't want it gumming up my pipes. So I scrape the bowl before I wash it. The seasonings, I was watching the video and I said earlier I wasn't sure about how much seasonings it was. I wish you could have seen it. It's a big pile on top of that big pile of flour. It looks like too much seasonings really, but for me, I like it a little stronger. I probably put like around 1/8 of a cup of seasonings. You have to watch your salt a little bit. Aromat, the Knorr Aromat seasoning, which I also failed to mention, is very difficult to find. You can order it online, but it is very difficult to find, and we actually find it at Goodwin's in the mountains. I find it at Goodwin's in the mountains in Crestline of California. Other than that, I've never found a place that carries it. And I prefer the red one to the yellow one, but you can use either one. The Greek seasoning, that was... I have the salt-free version. Cavender's, I guess. Anyway, I have the salt-free version. I prefer the yellow one, which has salt in it. It has a slightly different taste. But I didn't have any of that. I wanted to clarify. I threw in 2 extra eggs. I had 7 medium eggs. And then when I went to add like more flour and more egg at one point, I added 2 large eggs, just for your reference. I think I started to babble about chicken broth. If you go to do this with chickens, you're going to have at least 2 batches of chicken broth. And you're probably going to want to start out closer to 6 or 7 eggs. 2 to 3 chicken broths would be a little bit better. Double boiling a chicken versus double boiling a turkey. I won't say I don't do it. It just goes a lot different. You're going to get a much better quality broth out of double boiling a turkey. And then earlier in the video I was watching it again and I said something about try to do one or the other. I either season, I wanted to clarify that, I either season my flour more heavily, which is the dough, or I season my broth more heavily, and that is, you just don't want them both like super salty or something, and then you end up with like a little too much punch. Of course, I do a lot of punch, just so you know. I have the tendency to season mine pretty heavily compared to my dad's, at least. So anyway, you know, give it a shot. Let me know how you think it goes, and if you have any problems, I'll try to help you troubleshoot. And I don't think I gave you a real clear visual of the dough, but basically until it's not really sticking to your hands, and then if it's just sticking a little bit, like if you go to fold it and knead it, if you go to fold it over and it's a little bit tacky, you're about good. And then my little pile that I have on the cutting board, I'll just be like, I'll dip it in that, and then I'll be patting it out and kneading it a couple more times before I roll it out. So those are my tips I thought of so far. I hope you enjoy it, and I'm sorry we couldn't make it in person. See you soon. I wanted you to take a peek at what it looks like the following day after it's been in the fridge for a minute. The broth is a little bit more gelled than what you're looking for when you make a good broth, but I just want you to know what it looks like when you got it right, because if you make your broth a little bit too thin, it's still going to be runny and it's not going to have that gelled effect. And I didn't have an opportunity to show you what my broth looked like before I put the noodles in it, before I started boiling it. Anyway, take a peek. And I'm going to Sorry about this. See that? See how it kind of just chunks out? See how the broth is all gelled over there? Anyway, your broth looks a little, well, quite a bit thinner than that, but it's gonna gel kind of like that before you start your noodles if you've got it right. Otherwise, they're gonna end up a little bit thin. The flour, of course, will thicken it up in the cooking process, but I wanted you to take a peek at the finished product, and then if it turns out a little runny still, well, then you need to work on your broth probably, or your ratio of broth to noodles. Mine's probably a little low on broth, but I don't mind it much. Anyway, see you later.